is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Andrew Wilson. Our top stories this hour. It's time to meet. It's time to talk. Ukraine's president calls for negotiations to end the war as fierce fighting continues across the country. Ramping up the assault, Russia says it's used hypersonic missiles for the first time in Ukraine to destroy a weapons depot. And thousands have taken to the streets in Madrid as the war in Ukraine pushes energy prices to new highs. Ukraine's president has urged Russia to return to the negotiation table without delay or pay a high price. But President Putin has accused Ukraine of stalling existing peace talks by raising unrealistic proposals. This war of words comes as fierce fighting continues across the country 3 weeks after the start of Russia's invasion. Our correspondent Michael Voss is live for us in Lviv. Michael, good to talk to you. What exactly did President Zelensky have to say?
Well, remember, Andrew, that we're in the fourth week of this conflict with no let-up in sight. We keep hearing that there's been some progress on peace negotiations. The two sides sat down together near the Belarusian border a week or two ago. They're now talking by video conference, but it isn't really getting anywhere terribly fast. The Russians accuse the Ukrainians of stalling in order to get more Western weapons in. The Ukrainians say the Russians are stalling to get reinforcements in. So now Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, in his latest address to the nation, but also aimed at Moscow, is saying that Moscow needs, if it wants to cut its losses, it needs to enter into meaningful negotiations. And that really that implies that what's needed is for him and President Putin to sit down face to face to thrash this out. Let's hear what he had to say.
I want everyone to hear me, especially in Moscow. The time has come to meet, to talk. The time has come to restore territorial integrity and justice for Ukraine. Otherwise, Russia's costs will be so high that you will not be able to rise again for several generations.
So I think the key words here are territorial integrity. This is, just how far is Ukraine prepared to go to vie for peace? Is it that they're going to have to accept that Russia, which annexed Crimea 8 years ago, is going to keep it? What about these disputed territories, these separatist areas in Donetsk and Luhansk? This is an area where I don't think that Ukraine's prepared to say we will let those territories go. I think this may be the major stumbling block for these peace negotiations. Andrew.
And the fighting's continuing, Michael. We know that. I mean, what are you hearing from these crucial battlefields?
Well, I think the crucial one at the moment is Mariupol, that city in the south that has been bombarded and pretty much flattened by the Russians. They say 80% of residential homes are now destroyed. We're told that Russian troops have entered and have reached the city centre. Very fierce fighting going on there. A much smaller Ukrainian group is trying to resist, but is finding it very difficult. And because of the fighting and the continued shelling, that rescue operation from the theatre seems to have halted. There could still be 1,000 people trapped in a basement underneath there. We're also hearing to the north of there, Mykolaiv, which is would give them access to send troops down to that iconic seaport of Odessa, which may be to be timed with a naval landing. So far, the Ukrainians are holding out. There's been a counter-offensive there, but they've taken some very heavy losses from a missile strike. Up in the capital, Kiev, apparently there's a counter-offensive, a Ukrainian counter-offensive going on to the north, trying to cut Russian supply lines. And in the second city, Kharkiv, it's just being shelled and shelled continuously. But for the moment, neither the capital nor the second city, Kharkiv, have fallen to the Russians.
Michael, thanks very much indeed. Michael Voss there in Lviv for us. And Michael was talking about that crucial port city of Odessa in southern Ukraine, which is bracing for a possible assault by Russian troops. In preparation for that, a local shooting club is now teaching local residents how to defend themselves. Maxim Voitenko reports.
The situation in Odessa is tense now. Russians don't strike Odessa now, but they launch rockets in Odessa suburbs. So a lot of citizens of Odessa decided to get new ability now. For example, how to handle with weapons. And every day a lot of people, dozens of people, come here to Odessa Sports Shooting Club. It's located in suburbs of Odessa. So we decided to ask them why they do it.
So, as you know, when you're having the weapon, the key question is just related to the safety, and safety first. Obviously, a lot of people think that the key thing is just the shooting forces, but in fact, with the modern weapon like this, it's super easy to shoot someone, but it's pretty easy as well to injure yourself or kill some of your friends as well. So the key thing that we learn here is just the safety basics that allow us to use the weapon safely.
I came here to learn how to use weapons safely. If we have to go to defend our city, we will be able to do something.
I came here because of the situation in the country. The whole world knows we are fighting Russia, and it's important for every Ukrainian citizen to defend our land. I'm not a military man, but I understand the situation we're in. We need to give people knowledge. We can give it professionally and help people to understand how to use weapons.
The president of the International Committee of the Red Cross says that civilians are paying the heaviest price as fighting rages across the country of Ukraine. Peter Maurer has been speaking to CGTN's Mung Tsing-shung in Lviv.
Civilians affected by the conflict in Ukraine are terrified of what the future holds. Families huddle in unheated basement knowing their neighborhoods are now front lines. Women and children walk through cold in search of shelter. A crisis which comes on top of 8 years of conflict already deepens by the hour. Kyiv today is too empty, but the residents in hiding are mostly have running water, electricity, and access to medical care. In too many cities of the countries, families are trapped and struggle to find enough water and food to survive. The suffering in Mariupol must not become the future of Ukraine.
Russia and Ukraine have held several rounds of talks so far. What do you think are the most pressing issues to deal with at the moment?
It's access and exit of besieged and combat zones in which the front lines are close together and civilian traps. Despite all the difficulties of negotiating access and evacuation routes, we have seen an increasing number of civilians able to leave in agreed upon and safe corridors. We are at the beginning of a process, but I wanted to inject also not only a negative image of the talks not moving forward, but a positive image of progress made. We need to ensure that the basic provisions of the Geneva Conventions with regard to the particularly protected persons, prisoners of war, civilians detained for imperative security reasons, those who have died and those who are missing, that these key issues, which are obligations under the Geneva Conventions, are part of these talks, and that both parties comply with the law and engage with the ICRC.
China has reiterated it intends to adopt an independent and objective approach towards the war in Ukraine. Foreign Minister Wang Yi echoed the comments of President Xi in his video call with US President Joe Biden that all parties must work together to promote dialogue and negotiations.
President Xi Jinping was very clear and comprehensive about China's involvement in Ukraine. And the most important message was that China is always a force for peace in the world. We always stand for peace and oppose war. This is not only China's historical and cultural tradition, but also our consistent foreign policy. Therefore, we will make our judgment independently in an objective and fair manner based on the merits of the matter itself. We do not accept any external coercion or pressure and oppose any groundless accusation or suspicion against China.
The war in Ukraine has given rise to the worst humanitarian crisis in Europe since the end of World War II. The UN says over 3 million Ukrainians have now fled their country in the past 3 weeks. More than 2 million of those have arrived in Poland. Our correspondent Natalie Carney is in Lublin, a Polish city on the border with Ukraine. Natalie, good to talk to you. Poland's still taking the largest share of the refugees from Ukraine. What's the latest there where you are?
Yes, Andrew, they most certainly are. Every single day, upwards of 100,000 people we are hearing is crossing the border into Poland from the Ukraine. Most of those going through the Medyka border crossing. And once you're at that border crossing, there's literally like a kilometer-long line of different aid organizations and NGOs there to help them with any questions, with any needs these people may have. A lot of them then move on to bigger cities across Poland, such as Warsaw, such as Krakow, such as here in Lublin. Now, Lublin has become sort of the EU humanitarian center where most of the humanitarian goods come to and then are filtered out to the rest of Poland, predominantly along the border, so that those newly arrived have access to them. But the city itself is doing tremendous work. On Sunday, for instance, there will be Ukrainian church services. From here on in, they get free public transport. As well, free Polish lessons, free medical care, free dentist care. And right behind me here is the Lublin Cultural Center. They are sort of the headquarters, the flashpoint for the coordination of all these different humanitarian initiatives that have been put into place. And this is being seen all across Poland, and predominantly, I should add, invigorated by grassroots movements. A lot of this is being done by just simple Polish people who want to help as much they can with their businesses, with their time, even with their homes.
Natalie, 2 million in 3 weeks is an awful lot of people. It'll bring an awful lot of pressure with it, I'm sure. In your assessment, what are the greatest challenges facing both visitors and hosts?
Absolutely. I mean, that's not a small amount of people, and especially in a country such as Poland, which is certainly not the biggest country in the European Union. And Poland really is starting to feel the pinch now that we're heading into the 4th week of this conflict. The president himself, Andrzej Duda, has said that these 2 million people in Poland is a huge challenge, and has now referred to Poland having a refugee crisis. This comes as we are hearing reports of space basically running out. In one of the main cities, Krakow, for instance, we're hearing people sleeping in the railway stations, as well hotels that are completely full, not with guests, but with Ukrainian refugees, people giving up their homes, 8 people squeezed into an apartment for 1, people sleeping in office spaces. This is an absolute pressure on Poland, no doubt, but they do say they will continue to open their arms and open their hearts to their Ukrainian neighbors, but they really are asking for further support from the European Union. The European Union has offered to give them 500 million euros to help them facilitate all of this, but the president is basically saying that is simply just not enough. As many of these Ukrainians as well, some of them do filter off to the rest of the European Union, but a lot of them want to stay here in Poland so they can be as close to home when this conflict ends.
Natalie, thanks very much indeed. Natalie Carney there in Lublin for us. Still ahead here on CGTN, almost 1 million Ukrainians are expected to head into Italy as they flee the war. We'll take a look at how that country's preparing for the influx.
The British public not only need to know, but they want to know more about China.
70 years ago, a small group of British businessmen travelled to China to unlock opportunities between the two countries. They became known as the icebreakers.
East meets West. We're now at a time when we need the icebreaker spirit.
My first impression when I came to China is I noticed the similarities more than the differences.
It's about understanding each other's culture.
We look at the things that bring our nations together.
My dad is Chinese, my mum is English. I grew up in London, but I went to China to work at age 25.
Whenever I've gone to China, it's just been amazingly welcoming.
The music is beautiful language and bringing all the people together.
I'm exploring, I'm experimenting, I'm trying something new, all in the hopes to build a bridge. And I think we definitely need more people doing that.
It was only when I got to know my Chinese father in my 40s that I really got to know the other half of myself.
I hope we make it another 50 years, another 500 years.
Meet the bridge builders, the individuals who dared to think beyond the horizon and to open up our world, on TV and online on CGTN.
I hope that you will all become icebreakers and bridge builders.
Welcome back. Russia says it's used hypersonic missiles for the first time since the war in Ukraine started more than 3 weeks ago. But Western sanctions continue to tighten, with Halliburton, the latest oil multinational, to pull out of Russia. Russia's new media law severely limits what correspondents there are able to report. So let's join our correspondent Giles Gibson live in Riga. Giles, good to talk to you. Russia's defense ministry is saying it's using these missiles for the first time. What's the significance of that?
Yeah, Andrew, the name of these missiles in Russian is Kinjal, which translates roughly into dagger or blade. So there is clearly a lot of symbolism behind that name there. Just to give you some context on these hypersonic missiles, they are designed to travel faster than Mach 5, so faster than 5 times the speed of sound. And they move so quickly, and they move at just such a different trajectory to traditional missiles that they are very good at evading anti-missile systems. Also worth noting that the Russian Ministry of Defense in Moscow has said that this strike targeted an underground weapons depot that was pretty far west in Ukraine. And this is a bit of a pattern that we've seen developing over the last few days or so. Really, the Russians starting to hit these sites, these Ukrainian military targets, much further west than they have done previously, perhaps sending a message to the West that they are prepared to hit these targets that are right on the border with NATO member countries such as Poland.
And Giles, Western companies still pulling the plug on their Russian operations, Halliburton the latest. How much are these sanctions hurting the Russian economy now?
Yeah, Halliburton, that oil services company, is saying that it's not going to open up any new contracts, no new investment inside Russia, and it's also going to sort of wind down its existing operations in the country. We've also heard from another oil services company, Schlumberger. They are also saying that they are not going to be signing any new deals, any new contracts with companies inside Russia. This is just really a stampede at this point amongst major oil companies. We've seen all of these different multinational companies deciding that with these new set of sanctions that have been placed on Moscow, there is really just no way that they can operate in the country. We've seen ExxonMobil, BP, also Shell, all deciding to head for the exits to extricate themselves from the Russian markets. Just finally, Andrew, I think really worth noting here that both those two companies that I was talking about earlier, Schlumberger as well as Halliburton, they are oil services companies. So what they do is they help with the logistics, with the equipment, with the technology to help companies actually pull oil out of the ground. So with them deciding that they are not going to be signing any new contracts inside Russia, that is really going to affect companies that are still staying inside the country, because they are going to struggle now to find companies to help them with the logistics side.
Giles, thanks very much indeed. Giles Gibson there in Riga for us. And as Giles was saying, there are hundreds of multinational companies now withdrawing or halting business in Russia. More organisations join that list every day. One of the key sectors impacted is tech. So our correspondent Mark New reports now from California on the technology giants taking that stand.
At least 417 companies have either withdrawn, suspended, or scaled back operations in Russia, according to a list compiled by the Yale School of Management. That list continues to grow, with a sizable portion made up of tech.
It's a cumulative effect of all these products and services vaporizing. Because if you were in Moscow a year ago, it wouldn't feel that different than any other city. But all of a sudden, you know, doing simple things in Moscow, from ATM withdrawals to, you know, buying an iPhone, are vaporizing.
The world's most valuable company, Apple, was one of the first tech companies to stop selling products in Russia. Microsoft, Netflix, Airbnb, and IBM are just a few of the other multi-billion-dollar tech entities that followed suit.
Tech companies are not looking at revenue loss in Russia. They need to look first at their employees, because if your employees are not totally behind what the company's doing, it impacts productivity and success.
But some areas of tech may have a greater impact than others. Tech analyst Bob O'Donnell points to computer chip makers like Intel and AMD, and financial tech companies like PayPal suspending Russian sales.
That's a big deal, because chips get used in more than just your normal PCs. They can be used in military equipment and other things like that. So if you cut off not only the chips, but all the things that are made from the chips, then the services that, you know, leverage the devices made from those chips. By cutting off some of these financial systems, you know, you're cutting off the ability to actually survive and thrive.
Twitter stopped advertising in Russia, while Russia itself blocked access to Instagram. TikTok said Russia's new fake news law gave it no choice but to suspend live streaming and new content in Russia, while it reviewed the safety implications for its staff. Epic Games, the maker of video game Fortnite, stopped commerce to Russia, but said it was not blocking access for the same reason other communication tools remain online. The free world should keep all lines of dialogue open.
With gaming platforms, one of the things that people do is not just game, they also communicate with each other. And so I think some of the gaming platforms wanted to say, hey, is there some mechanism to allow normal people to still stay in touch? So it's a tough call that a lot of these companies are weighing on how do we do this in a way that we want to make a statement, but we know that there are plenty of people, you know, in the country who are not happy with what's going on, and allow them to still be in touch with the outside world.
O'Donnell says in recent years, tech companies have grown more socially conscious, especially with sustainability goals. Halting business with Russia takes this consciousness to a new level. Business is now not only about giving customers what they want, but also about being the kind of company employees want to work for. Mark New, CGTN, Palo Alto, California.
Thousands of demonstrators have taken to the streets of Madrid to protest against soaring energy prices. It comes as Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez joined fellow EU leaders in calling for an urgent EU-wide response to the energy crisis. Rahul Patak reports now from Madrid.
Angry and united. What had started out as a truck strike at the beginning of the week to protest against rising fuel prices has now developed into a full-on anti-government demonstration backed by Spain's opposition, including the far-right Vox party. Inflation now runs at over 7%, and that is the highest this country has seen in over 3 decades. Energy prices are now at record highs and have prompted panic buying at petrol stations. Now, prices were already rising fast prior to the conflict in Ukraine, and the situation there now has put even more pressure on oil prices across the globe.
There has been an increase in prices that people simply can't afford. Very soon people won't be able to make it to the end of the month.
This is a serious issue because lots of people need to travel for work by car, and every day it just gets more and more expensive. But our salaries remain the same.
On Friday, Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez met other EU leaders from Italy, Portugal and Greece to push for a joint response to the crisis and a summit on the issue towards the end of the month. Sanchez has proposed a change to the current system and suggested a decoupling of the cost of natural gas with electricity prices on the wholesale energy markets. Now, what is clear that many in Spain want some relief from the current crippling energy prices. It's a major problem, not just for people here in Madrid, but right across the globe, and a solution needs to be found soon. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
Italy has one of Europe's largest Ukrainian communities, and authorities expect up to 900,000 refugees to travel there in the weeks ahead. Assisi, Italy's so-called City of Peace, is playing a key role in providing accommodation, food and healthcare for the mostly women and children who've left everything behind. Hermione Kitson now reports.
1 year ago, Maria Kushnik lost her husband to COVID-19, and now she's been forced to flee her war-torn country with their 3 children.
It is really difficult. My goodness. It is something incredible, and I hope it finishes because so many people are suffering, among them young children.
Despite her hardship, Maria says she's among the lucky ones, like dozens of other Ukrainians who now call this refugee centre in Umbria home.
Until you see the war with your own eyes, you don't realise what war is. At least now I'm at ease knowing my children are far away from it all.
Oksana Kostyuk also made the harrowing journey out of danger with her 6-year-old son, Oleksiy, leaving her husband behind. She's now in the care of her friend Sofia in the city of Assisi.
I never could have imagined this situation. There were rumours, but we never actually believed a war would happen. It's still like a bad dream. I was really scared to come to a new country, but I've been so humbled by all the generosity and support we've received here in Italy.
Italy's sacred City of Peace is playing a key role in refugee reception efforts, which are being managed at a local and regional level across the country.
The councils are really on the front line to provide the primary needs of accommodation, food and healthcare, including COVID tests and vaccinations.
Italy has one of Europe's largest Ukrainian communities, and since the conflict began, around 50,000 Ukrainian refugees have fled here. But authorities say it's just the beginning, with another 900,000 expected to arrive here in the weeks ahead. While many hope to one day return home, others have already started a new life in Italy, like these 2 Ukrainian children welcomed with a standing ovation on their first day of school. A show of unity and resilience amid a conflict with far-reaching consequences. Hermione Kitson, CGTN Assisi, Italy.
3 Russian cosmonauts have arrived at the International Space Station wearing Ukrainian colours. They came on board in flight suits matching the yellows and blues of the country's flag. And the men were the first new arrivals since Russia attacked Ukraine last month. The 3 were welcomed with hugs by their fellow crew of Americans, Russians and Germans. The ISS is a joint project between Russia, America, Canada, Japan and several European countries. Our headlines again. Come back to the negotiating table or face a high cost. Ukraine's president calls for talks with Moscow as fierce fighting continues across the country. Ramping up the assault, Russia says it's used hypersonic missiles for the first time in Ukraine to destroy a weapons depot. And thousands have taken to the streets in Madrid as the war in Ukraine pushes energy prices to new highs. And that is the world today. Thanks for watching. We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Daily Motion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK 24 hours a day on Freeview. More news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's The Agenda with Stephen Cole. For now, from all of the team in London, goodbye.